You're listening to the Art Said podcast, episode number 14, Curriculum, Negotiating the Minefield. Welcome to the Art Said podcast, conversations through the perspective of the arts in education, hosted by educators and artists Shauna Longo and Edric DeBose. Good afternoon, Edric. How are we doing today?
I'm fine, and you?
I am fantastic.
Lunchtime once again.
Lunchtime once again. All right. So this episode, Edric and I have been talking about curriculum in different ways, shapes, forms, and under different terms, right? For years. And so this episode, we're going to focus, it's about experience with what can be called a curriculum, not necessarily a definition of it, although we are going to kind of give you a few definitions because, I think curriculum is one of the most wildly misused terms in education.
Yeah, it's like saying I love you. Like I love my wife. I love my car. What it's like it's really broad.
It's really broad, yes. So talk to us a little bit about why we put in the minefield in there, Edric.
Okay, so for me, it's a minefield because there have been battles that are previously fought, and you're walking through the aftermath of all these battles in terms of what the curriculum is that you're looking at. So I want to mention too that we're talking about two different perspectives here. So my perspective is more so that of a teacher. Shauna, your perspective, as you know, for who's listening, is more of a supervisor and someone who's in more of an administrative position. So you're dealing with curriculum from two different perspectives here. So my perspective is just as a teacher. My frustrations are, some of the curriculums I've dealt with in different districts, different circumstances. As I'm looking at them, I can tell that I'm looking at a document that was put together by like 5 or 6 different people at least. And they were kind of pieced together for whatever that emergency was at the time when the curriculum needed to be updated. So you have it begins here. The pieces are all over the place, and they're not really necessarily put together. So it takes a while to unravel that as you're looking at it and to figure out what you're going to do with it. And then the other piece of that is the unrealistic, or seemingly to me, unrealistic benchmarks. When you talk about, by grade X, a student should be able to do this or that. So it's frustrating sometimes to think about what you're being asked to do when you're aware that your clientele or your particular students are not at that level. They haven't had that foundational work. So you're really working at an earlier place than what is, the assumed place that you're supposed to be, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll interject and say that, I'm coming mainly now, I'm in admin role as a supervisor of visual performing arts, but I had 22 years as the teacher, right? And I tended to be called upon for, I don't know what reason or why, but to be we need the curriculum rewritten. Can you do it? And I always, every time would think to myself, nobody ever told me how to do this. I've never had any training on what should the curriculum really be. And so for me, I just did the research and I kind of dug in and taught myself about what curriculum is and how it should look. And yes, in like post-grad school, becoming getting my admin degree, I did then had some curriculum courses. So, but before that, everybody just assumes everybody knows how to write a curriculum, and they don't. They don't. Even if you went, especially as arts people, I didn't have a course in college that talked about curriculum. We learned how to write lesson plans, but not for nothing. Even that is wildly outdated from now till when I learned how to do it.
Right.
I don't want to say how many years ago,
Right.
over 20 years ago,
Yep.
over 20 years. And so I remember being asking in my second job, actually, it was my third year teaching, and I asked for the curriculum to see what had been done before and what would guide me. And I was literally handed a 1-page piece of paper. It was I can see it in this moment. It was in landscape, and it was like the 11 standards. And I was like, this is not a curriculum. This is the standards copied and pasted into a document. And did they actually pay somebody to copy and paste these standards into here? Like, seriously, somebody got paid for this? And so I think that most teachers, I hope y'all listening would agree, feel like curriculum is this thing that they have a district has to check the box that exists, that
Right.
is available for parents to access, and that sits on a shelf and collects dust until the next time they have to prove that they've updated the curriculum and they check the box that it has X, Y, and Z that the DOE tells them it needs to contain. And it's not really a living, breathing, viable source of information to actually assist teachers.
Right. So that's the frustration. What does this document and these things that are being I'm told that I'm supposed to be responsible for, what does it have to do with me in my classroom dealing with my specific clientele, which is really different than, like I said, the assumptions made in the document.
Correct. And it's not something that just one person can do alone, nor should just one person do alone, because each of us is clouded by our own passions and purposes and love and what we really don't like, right? And it skews. And so you need to have different people in the room to kind of balance it out to meet the needs of more students. So why don't you talk about your basic definition of curriculum, Edric?
Well, again, I'm just borrowing from someone else, but this seems to make
Right.
sense to me because when I try to figure out what it is or where that sits in relationship to everything else that has to be done and benchmarks versus assessments versus so I like this definition. Curriculum is a standards-based sequence of planned experiences where students practice to achieve proficiency in content and applied learning skills. Right, and the curriculum might or might not have planned interaction with students, instructional content, materials, resources, or a process for evaluating the attainment of educational objectives. Right, so that's the idea. So it's standards from which you're going to create planned experiences to hopefully allow your students to achieve some kind of certain proficiency and learn these skills that they can then apply. That's kind of a basic definition of what it is. So again, for me as a teacher, my thing is, well, where do I find a sense of agency? What can I own, and then what can I really use? Because you're restricted in some ways. So again, in reading for this particular episode, I came across this statement about First Amendment rights. So First Amendment rights don't extend to teaching. Right? You can't really do or say whatever you want to because you have to follow what is an approved curriculum. And like I said, the Minefield, there's a history of previous decisions about what you can and cannot teach. And as we all know, there's a lot of battles currently about what should and should not be taught. Who has the right to make decisions about that, given that we're talking about a public institution, and so the funding coming from the government. So it gets really, really complicated.
It has come under fire a lot lately. We'll leave it at that.
So then where do you have agency? What can you own and what can you work with? And again, there have been a variety of different approaches to how you handle that as a teacher.
And I think that that's the key is what is the approach and what support? Because I think teachers don't get enough support when the words curriculum come up and they have to create it, right? I mean, some districts don't even have a director of curriculum and instruction to be able to steer that ship. They literally just tell their teachers, you need to do this. Here's a template, fill in the boxes. But it's not process driven. It's not a discussion. It's not a debate. It's not a what do we value? What are we going to do? It's just to get this done so we can check the box.
Right.
And I think that's why teachers get frustrated because they don't feel qualified to do. It's like imposter syndrome, right? Like they're
Right.
telling me to do this, and like, is this going to come back? We're proud of what we do, and is this going to come back and haunt me? Like if I create this and then somebody doesn't like it, is that going to come back on me? And there's all these internal, issues that we consciously or subconsciously have related to curriculum.
Depending on how you understand curriculum, is this something? What am I supposed to be doing then? I mean, that's really the struggle for me. Like, okay, so I have this document, these expectations. How do I apply this? So part of what sparked this episode was a conversation earlier with Dr. Murphy. Shona, you can talk about this more in particular. But what stuck with me in that particular episode is when he talked about the outsourcing of a curriculum, right? And so, because he was talking about creativity in the schools and the importance of teachers owning and creating a curriculum or a way of teaching or approaching that where the arts can really thrive. And that's what he was talking about. And then, so, the question is, well, what do you do when your curriculum doesn't really fit the clientele that you're working with? What do you?
That happens more often than not, because curriculums aren't designed in a way to meet all the needs of our students
Right.
and the needs of all students, right? All their needs and all students.
Right.
So let's kind of backtrack for one moment. The words, and I'm taking this from the great Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe, but the words curriculum and assessment have almost as many meanings as there are people using the terms. And I 100% agree with that. You can talk to different people and they will talk about and discuss curriculum and assessment in different ways. Curriculum really takes content and shapes it into a plan for effective teaching and learning. Curriculum is a specific plan with identified lessons in an appropriate form and sequence for directing the teaching. So it is something that should be living and teachers should be looking at frequently, if not daily, to guide what they're doing versus not even knowing where it exists. Where is it? Is it hard to find on the website? Where is it? Now, in terms of the assessment, is the act of determining the extent to which the curricular goals are being met and have been achieved. Assessment is really an umbrella term that's used to mean the deliberate use of many methods, formative, summative, diagnostic, right, to gather evidence to indicate that students are meeting the standards. Assessment is just all of our methods we use to determine, are these kids getting it?
Right.
So we want to talk about a couple strategies for negotiating this minefield. I know I just quoted Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe, and one strategy is understanding by design framework. If you haven't heard of UBD, go ahead and Google it. There's tons of stuff out there, but that framework focuses on the design of the instruction. First, you identify skills to be acquired. 2, what is the evidence of acquisition? And then 3, how can we plan for this, right? It focuses on engagement and inquiry and posing appropriate essential questions. And I'll tell you, we're not going to dig into essential questions today because that will be a future episode, I have a feeling, all of its own. That's another term that is wildly misused in education and never really defined. And everyone just assumes everyone knows what they are and how to do them and how to make good ones. And I feel pretty safe in saying probably 80 to 90% of the time people really don't. And I'm not saying that to be negative. It's just the reality. I didn't until I really dug in and started learning about it. Would you agree with that, Edric?
It's confusing. Yes, it's confusing. And again, these
and
are
the purpose of them.
Yeah.
Right.
These are areas that we are not typically trained in.
No. So with understanding by design, it's not a prescriptive program. So you're not outsourcing the curriculum to get somebody's UBD, right? It's a conceptual framework. It's a design process. Process is the key term, and template, right? And an accompanying set of design standards. It doesn't offer a specific curriculum, but rather a way to design or redesign any curriculum to make student understanding more likely. And I think it's really important to know, like, if your district is talking about using UBD, if they're saying they can get it done in like a couple of years, you can laugh at them on like, not to their, well, I mean, maybe you can to their faces, but I'm going to tell you, like, I'm in the process of working on shifting to that. And we fully know it's going to take a good 10 years to get there. Like, it's a long process. This is not, it's a big shift and you can't do it overnight. And you have to support the administrators to understand it, the teachers to be able to enact it and guide those conversations so that it comes up with something that is viable. And so the stages of backwards design, and you have like year 1 might be just identify desired results. It's backwards because you need to know what's your end goal for the students. What are the desired results that they will learn? Then maybe year 2, determine acceptable evidence. So what assessments are we going to use to know that's going to give us the evidence they learned those goals that we determined in step 1. And then the last step is to plan the learning experiences and instruction that get you there. So where do you want to go? How will you know you got there? And then you figure out how you get there in terms of the teaching and learning. So it's not until like year 3 that you're actually designing the lessons, which is wild. Probably many of you are thinking, holy cow.
Well, that's why I call it the minefield, because
Yeah.
there are battles that were fought previously. There's still mines out there. The war is over. One of the wars is over. There's still mines out there, and you don't know when you're going to step on one. But also you have these different varying levels of understanding of what an educational framework is, right? So you have old school models, you have your newer school models, and it's like this slow moving beast, right? And you have
Yes,
to, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. Just person as a teacher, you have to. It's difficult to find a way to negotiate through all of that to get to do what it is you're hoping to do as a teacher.
absolutely. Now, another one that I think some people use UBD and UDL interchangeably, but Universal Design for Learning. That's from Dr. David Rose and Dr. Ann Meyer from Harvard School of Graduate Education. And that UDL embraces the needs of diverse learners, incorporating technology to support engagement, self-regulation, and collaboration. So that work begins by recognizing that far too many curricula are designed around a presumption of how the average student learns, but there is no average student. Every
Right.
student has unique learning needs. And when a curriculum doesn't recognize this learner variability, it locks a lot of kids out of the opportunity to be successful and build their knowledge.
Yeah. What I appreciate about this is it's the presumption that there is no average student, right?
Right.
That each
And in some districts, that's very powerful and should be the approach,
right,
you
right,
know? And it's not just about the struggling students, it's what about the excelling students? How are we challenging them and meeting their needs on the other end of the spectrum, right? And I think a lot of times that gets lost in translation as well.
right.
It's like, oh, just put some gifted and talented things in there to push kids or give them extra worksheets. And it's not about that.
But I appreciate the fact that you begin with that. You begin with an understanding that there isn't the average student, and you're not teaching just towards the middle. You begin with an understanding that there are a variety of other needs you're going to have to address and look at. Again, it's coming from that old monitor standard, right? The old standardization model to
Yeah.
where we are today. Yeah.
Right, with the newer standards that are more conceptual and more process driven. And I think that if you're doing a UBD framework, understanding by design, the right way, UDL is kind of embedded in it.
Right.
From my experience personally, it can be if it's done well. How's that?
Well, it seems like UBD is more of a process, but UDL takes into consideration that there's a variety of circumstances you're going to have to address.
Yeah,
And,
correct.
right.
And you could be addressing them within that other framework, that other process, right?
Right.
Yeah, one can. And I think this goes back to the folks, you can't outsource it, right? Like, let's wrap back to that to end this up. You got to put in the work. This is work. And if you think they're going to give you 10 hours to rewrite your curriculum, I'm talking about a process that's going to take, I said 10 years, and probably people gasp at that. And that's with all PD days being focused on doing that work, right? Coming back to that work consistently. It's a living, breathing document that is always evolving. It never just sits on the shelf and isn't looked at. It's always an editable, is that even a word? I don't know. A document able to be edited at any moment. When you realize this isn't working, we need to make the necessary changes to meet our students' needs. And so if they're going to just give you 10 hours and call it a day, that's not going to work. You need consistent professional development time to get groups of people together. You need maybe get them subs for a day or a half a day to work on this during school time. But just like sending them in July, here, you got 10 hours. I know it's going to take you longer, but that's what we can afford to pay you to get this curriculum rewritten. And yeah, get it to me when it's done in about a week. Like, that's just not an effective model. And then you end up with what Edric was talking about at the beginning of this episode, and I've experienced as well.
Right. So I think one of the things is to be aware of the fact that you're going to have these materials and have these expectations that will be given to you by whatever larger. I mean, we talked earlier about the publishers being in. If you're not in Texas, if you're not in California.
100%. Yeah, they're going to sell you these textbooks, and yeah, they're written for Texas and California folks. And so if you're not there, they're probably not going to fit what you're doing. You got to make it your own.
So you're going to have to tailor it to your particular clientele. I mean,
yeah.
Right.
And in the arts, we don't even have those unless you're teaching a very specific course that happens to have probably a textbook written for college level. Let's be real, that we're utilizing at a high school level. But, that's not a curriculum. That's a textbook. It's a resource that should support your curriculum. So I think it's gotten easier with the growth of the internet and the amount of resources available to folks that have steered us away from this textbook driving a curriculum kind of mindset. And so for the arts, we've always had that ability to make it our own a little bit more because we didn't have that driving our instruction. But yeah, you got to be willing to put in the time and actually make it something that is actually useful and helpful to you. And you may have to have some hard conversations about values and what do we want our students to be able to know and be able to do, and what is appropriate for them, and what are our belief system. And you have to understand your community, because it's going to be a little bit different everywhere depending upon, even Edric and I are in 2 different school districts now, and they're very different communities.
Right.
You know,
It's also the other piece of it is when you think about the world that students are going to inherit, which is different than the world that we live in now, and it's changing radically. So if you don't have an awareness of a certain kind of a model for how big the world is and of the different ways of talking and relating, you're going to have to understand in order to move forward in the world. It's a problem. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Well, we talked about a lot. We hope this episode was helpful in your understanding, and maybe you will feel a little less nervous when you hear the word curriculum or assessment. But we just kind of touched on, we got to like the frosting on top of the cake, barely, like just the tip of the iceberg in this conversation. So more will come of this, but we hope you enjoyed lunch with us today as we kind of chatted through another topic that we are passionate about. Have a great day.
Thank you. See you.